Here's yet another chapter in the seemingly never-ending story of police brutality, European thug culture, and white-on-black crime. Mix in abuse of pseudo-authority by a typical hairy Neanderthal pig, and we have a recipe for disaster. Maybe, just maybe, if we talk about the subject enough, these savages will be forced to wear body cameras with no excuses, zero tolerance, with maximum penalties looming, and we can stop some of these chimp outs from occurring. Now, the following news comes courtesy of the New York Times. The NewYorkTimes.com writes, and I quote, "A white police officer in North Charleston, South Carolina, was charged with murder on Tuesday after a video surfaced showing him shooting in the back and killing an apparently unarmed black man while the man ran away. The officer, Michael T. Slager, 33, said he had feared for his life because the man had taken his stun gun in a scuffle after a traffic stop on Saturday. A video, however, shows the officer firing 8 times as the man, Walter L. Scott, 50, fled. The North Charleston mayor announced the state charges at a news conference Tuesday evening. The shooting came on the heels of high-profile instances of police officers using lethal force in New York, Cleveland, Ferguson, Missouri, and elsewhere. The deaths have set off a national debate over whether the police are too quick to use force, particularly in cases involving black men. A White House task force has recommended a host of changes to the nation's police policies, and President Obama sent Attorney General Eric H. Holder Jr. to cities around the country to try to improve police relations with minority neighborhoods. North Charleston is South Carolina's third largest city with a population of about 100,000. African Americans make up about 47% of residents, and whites account for about 37%. The police department is about 80% white, according to data collected by the Justice Department in 2007, the most recent period available. "When you're wrong, Mayor Keith Summy said during the news conference, and if you make a bad decision, don't care if you're behind the shield or just a citizen on the street, you have to live by that decision." End quote. The shooting unfolded after Officer Slager stopped the driver of a Mercedes-Benz with a broken tail light, according to police reports. Mr. Scott ran away and Officer Slager chased him into a grassy lot that abuts a muffler shop. He fired his taser, an electronic stun gun, but it did not stop Mr. Scott, according to police reports. Moments after the struggle, Officer Slager reported on his radio, quote, "Shots fired and the subject is down. He took my taser," end quote, according to police reports. But the video, which was taken by a bystander and provided to the New York Times by the Scott family lawyer, presents a different account. The video begins in the vacant lot, apparently moments after Officer Slager fired his taser. Wires which carry the electrical current from the stun gun appear to be extending from Mr. Scott's body as the two men tussle and Mr. Scott turns to run. Something, it is not clear whether it is a stun gun, is either tossed or knocked to the ground behind the two men, and Officer Slager draws his gun, the video shows. When the officer fires, Mr. Scott appears to be 15 to 20 feet away and fleeing. He falls after the last of 8 shots. The officer then runs back towards where the initial scuffle occurred and picks something up off the ground. Moments later, he drops an object near Mr. Scott's body, the video shows. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, the state's criminal investigative body, has begun an inquiry into the shooting. The FBI and the Justice Department, which has opened a string of civil rights investigations into police departments under Mr. Holder, is also investigating. The Supreme Court has held that an officer may use deadly force against a fleeing suspect only when there is probable cause that the suspect, quote, poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others, end quote. Officer Slager served in the Coast Guard before joining the force 5 years ago, his lawyer said. The police chief of North Charleston did not return repeated calls because police departments are not required to release data on how often officers use force. It was not immediately clear how often police shootings occurred in North Charleston, a working class community adjacent to the tourist destinations of Charleston. Mr. Scott had been arrested about 10 times, mostly for failing to pay child support or show up for court hearings, according to the Post and Courier newspaper of Charleston. He was arrested in 1987 on an assault and battery charge and convicted in 1991 of possession of a bludgeon, the newspaper reported. Mr. Scott's brother, Anthony, said he believed Mr. Scott had fled from the police on Saturday because he owed child support. Quote, he has 4 children. He doesn't have some type of big violent past or arrest record, said Chris Stewart, a lawyer for Mr. Scott's family. Quote, he had a job, he was engaged, he had back child support, and didn't want to go to jail for back child support, end quote. Mr. Stewart said the coroner had told him that Mr. Scott was struck 5 times, 3 times in the back, once in the upper buttocks, and once in the ear, with at least 1 bullet entering his heart. It's not clear whether Mr. Scott died immediately. The coroner's office declined to make the report available to the Times. Police reports say that officers performed CPR and delivered first aid to Mr. Scott. The video shows that for several minutes after the shooting, Mr. Scott remained face down with his hands cuffed behind his back. A second officer arrives, puts on blue medical gloves, and attends to Mr. Scott, but is not shown performing CPR. As sirens wail in the background, a third officer later arrives, apparently with a medical kit, but is also not seen performing CPR. Now, the story goes on a little bit longer, but I don't have the time to read all of it. So I'm just going to say, if you want to read the rest of the article, click the link below, visit my blog, you can read the whole thing for yourself. Anyway, here's my opinion on the matter. Michael Thomas Slager is a slacker. Now, this lazy savage didn't want to subdue the man that he pulled over for pretty much no reason, so he murdered him. Now, it would have required too much effort for him to pursue the subject, call for backup and apprehend him. And this is why I say that they just can't do their job. These entitled slackers felt it would be just too much work to run after a 50-year-old out-of-shape man. So he fired his pistol 8 times at the unarmed man's back and murdered him in cold blood, then proceeded to plant evidence on his dead body by dropping his taser or stun gun next to the man. Did I mention that in the video? Evidence the cop told the dying or already deceased man to put his hands behind his back after he shot him. And here's an interesting fact. He missed about 40% of his shots. He shot at him 8 times and only hit him 5 times. So 3 random people could have been dead by those 3 stray bullets. Anyway, here's the kicker. Slacker used the BS excuse of the man's tail light being out as a reason why he stopped him. But here's the thing. Now, it was reported that he had a new Mercedes-Benz, but I think it was like a new old car, like it was new to him, but it was just, like a used car or something like that. So my whole argument about his tail light being out is, why wouldn't he merely tell him his tail light is out and let him on his way? I mean, a cop is a civil servant, and this civil servant refused to just do his job. And if he would have followed proper procedure, this whole mess could have been avoided. I read some comments on the internet where people were expressing their opinions and they were defending both of the men in this story. But one of the things that the racist white supremacists, aka the terrorists, are running around saying is that black people don't respect authority, and that's why he ran. In reality, he ran because he was afraid for his life. This man most likely was racially profiled. He pulled him over just looking for a reason to arrest him. Let's be honest. Now, to make things more interesting, the story that I read to you clearly says they don't release data on how often officers use force. Now, how freaking convenient is that? We've seen lengthy statistics on anything and everything that could ever be used against a so-called black man in a court of public opinion. But they can't provide statistics for police brutality. I smell a rat. And for the record, the reason why white supremacists know all about alleged black statistics is because white supremacy is a business. All of these statistics are white supremacy's business analytics and projections. In other words, their so-called statistics are created to see where things are currently and where they intend for them to go. Those are progress reports. That's why they're in the form of charts, just like you see in a boardroom of an office during a meeting. These news stories about black statistics are briefings for whatever white supremacists happen to be watching or reading at that time. Now, I have to touch on that subject another time. I have some powerful information about it, but I don't have enough time to talk about it right now. Now, as you can see, statistics on police officers' use of force is not general public knowledge. How convenient. I mean, these people are civil servants. It's their job to serve and protect, not shoot and plant evidence. So why can't we see some numbers on how often this sort of thing happens? Is there no accountability? I mean, the media was quick to talk about the victim's criminal history, and they wouldn't even let his body begin to decompose before they began telling the world about how every time he's been in trouble with the law or the court system had occurred. But Walter Scott, of course, is not the first so-called black man to have this type of trouble with the police. These brutes in badges, killing, harassing, intimidating, and threatening, and lying to and about brown men is daily routine. Comedian Chris Rock was recently pulled over 3 times in 7 weeks. Well, actually, one of those times he was technically already pulled over, but the officer came to his window and harassed him anyway. And remember, he's from New York, not from the South, and he's rich. So the whole, it happens down south with old people who are stuck in a time warp, that excuse doesn't apply. The cop in this news story, for example, was 33 years old, and the cops from the Chris Rock incident were from the North. Therefore, these instances stop the age and geography mythologies in their tracks. Also, the whole financial class argument doesn't work here either, because the guy who was killed in South Carolina was driving a Mercedes-Benz, and Chris Rock is a multimillionaire celebrity. He wasn't driving some broke down hoopty. Now, in many cases, driving a nice car actually increases your chances of being stopped, harassed, intimidated, etc. Thankfully, Chris Rock documented the stops by taking photographs as evidence. If you want to see some stories about that, you have to visit my blog. There's a link below. You can see it for yourself. Anyway, the police are always lying. As a matter of fact, speaking of the police having a history of lying about incidents like this, Fox legal analyst Arthur Aidala made an appearance on Fox and Friends on Wednesday, April 8th of 2015, and he said flat out that it was standard operating procedure for officers to already have a gun on their ankle for times when they murder someone illegally so that they can plant the firearm to get away with killing them. Now, he worked for the district attorney's office in the 80s and the 90s, so this isn't hearsay. This is insider knowledge. He said this as if this was just general knowledge to everyone. Anyway, I posted that on my blog as well. Of course, we can't forget about 12-year-old Tamir Rice from Ohio. The police murdered that 12-year-old child who had allegedly had a pellet gun in the park. Now, when they arrived, they claimed they told him 3 times to put the firearm down. He did not comply. He waved the firearm at the officers, forcing them to fire away and killing them. However, a camera on a building near where the murder took place happened to have captured what really happened. The officers rolled up to the park, performed a drive-by shooting on the 12-year-old. They didn't shout out orders 3 times. They basically just rolled up and shot him like gangsters do. And there's plenty of other stories that I could bring up as examples, but I'm running out of time. I'm going to make a part 2 video on YouTube for this subject, and I just wanted to say this. When I heard about Walter Scott's murder, I wondered whether or not someone would create a charity to raise money for white supremacy's newest hero, Michael Thomas Slager. I mean, he killed a brown guy, so there has to be loads of people waiting to donate money to him, right? Well, yes, someone in fact created a GoFundMe campaign for him. It was thankfully denied by GoFundMe. They told the creator to kick rocks. Unfortunately, Indiegogo picked it up, and it's still currently active. In fact, they have 3 different funds, when I wrote my article a few days ago, for the officer on Indiegogo. 2 asking for $5,000 each, and 1 asking for $6,000. Also, someone started a change.org petition to have the Indiegogo campaigns for Michael T. Slager removed. On the bright side, 3 campaigns have been started on Indiegogo to benefit the family of Walter Scott, asking for $5,000, $25,000, and even one for $850,000 to go to the victim's family. And with that said, this is getting to be a really long video, so what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to make a part 2, and I'm going to break down the psychology of why white supremacists are doing what they're doing, and the different warning signs that people are ignoring about these people, because they obviously need help, and there's millions of them. They're not just in America, they're in Canada. Rather, they're not in the United States of America. They're in Canada, they're in Mexico, they're in Spain. They're everywhere. They could be hiding between your freaking couch cushions. These demons are everywhere, and they want to hurt you for no other reason than the color of your skin. If you check history, if you just look at what they've done throughout the world, this is just what they do. They have an issue with colorism. And in my next video, I'm going to blow a few people's minds, because a lot of people heard of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, but they're not connecting it to this. And basically, what I'm going to talk about in part 2 is exactly why they're doing stuff like this, and why they're getting away with it, because you're not paying attention. Stay tuned for part 2. Let me know what you think about it all below. Be sure to subscribe to the Meat Magazine YouTube channel. Visit meatmagazine.blogspot.com for more.